It started with a beam of blue and red cutting through the stillness of midnight, flashing across the rearview mirror of Eli's rig like an accusation. "You're too pretty to be driving this rig. License now." That's what the officer said when Eli rolled down his window, the scent of diesel and late-night coffee still clinging to his breath. Eli didn't speed. He didn't swerve. He didn't break any law. He had been driving this route for years, Tennessee to the far end of Colorado and back. Always on time, always clean logs, always professional. But tonight, something felt off the moment that siren wailed behind him on a deserted road cutting through a nameless, rural town. He wore what made him feel human on the road, a black crop top that hugged his lean frame, silver rings, and a rainbow bracelet his sister gave him before he left home. His nails were painted matte navy. His look was his armor and apparently a target. The officer didn't hide his smirk as he stepped up to the cab. His flashlight didn't scan the interior. It went straight to Eli's face, then dropped slowly as if looking for reasons. "This your truck?" Eli nodded. "Registered to the company. My name's on the bill of lading." He reached for his documents. Calm, trained. The officer didn't take them immediately. Instead, he stepped back, eyes still fixed on Eli, then turned away and spoke quietly into his shoulder radio. Eli couldn't hear the words, but he saw the shift. A call had been made. Another cruiser pulled up behind him within minutes. Lights off, silent, as if this wasn't a stop, but a setup. One of the backup officers walked past the cab, glanced into the back of the trailer, and said, "He doesn't look like a real driver. Looks more like an actor trying to play one." Laughter followed. Eli sat still. His hands rested visibly on the steering wheel, his breathing shallow. He knew the drill. He also knew something wasn't right. When he was finally told to exit the truck, it wasn't a request. The command came with a hand on a holster, a silent threat backed by the weight of a badge. Eli stepped down. His boots hit the pavement. The air was sharp and dry, the stars unbothered by the chaos unfolding below. "Face the hood, hands behind your head." The metal of the truck was cold against his forehead. He heard a voice call in more codes, something about possible impersonation, unverified license, and needs verification at the station. He opened his mouth to speak, but the chill in the officer's voice sliced sharper than the night. "You fit a profile, a little too well." They didn't take the time to check the license. They didn't inspect the logbook or verify the freight. What they saw was a man who didn't fit their idea of masculinity behind a wheel. And just like that, Eli found himself standing under the glare of floodlights, hands cuffed, head lowered, surrounded by men in uniform who decided who he was without asking. But what none of them knew was that Eli's dash cam was still recording everything. The quiet hum of the camera inside the cab was the only witness to the injustice no one expected would ever be seen. And in another part of the state, a message was already being typed by a woman named Ava, who watched it all and didn't look away. Because what happens next will shake every inch of that small town's silence. Follow Heart Story to hear what happens when a forgotten Pedi returns in uniform. And justice begins with one voice refusing to stay quiet. The small town station was dimly lit, its hallways smelling faintly of dust and old coffee. Eli's boots echoed against the tile as he was led inside, his wrists still bound behind his back. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering once as if unsure whether to expose what was happening underneath. They didn't tell him what he was being booked for. The charge written down was possible impersonation of a commercial driver, a fabricated term with no legal standing, yet somehow scribbled with conviction by a man who had already made up his mind. Sergeant Wilmer sat behind the intake desk, older, white, gray buzz-cut hair, tight jaw, a smirk hiding just behind his clipped tone. He looked at Eli the way someone looks at a crack in a windshield, something that shouldn't be there. He didn't ask Eli's name. He simply said, "Take off the earrings and that bracelet. You're not on a runway." Eli didn't move. Wilmer's voice rose. "Now!" Another officer stepped forward, Eli stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, then slowly reached up and removed the silver hoops from each ear. The rainbow bracelet slipped off his wrist and dropped onto the intake table with a faint snap. A pair of khaki-colored uniform pants and a stiff jail-issue shirt were handed to him. "No more games," Wilmer muttered. "We'll see how long this act holds up without accessories." He was led into a cold side room and ordered to change. The mirror on the wall was cracked. The reflection that looked back at him didn't look unfamiliar, just stripped, not of identity, but of dignity. Meanwhile, outside the holding cell door, Officer Ava stood silently. She had been there the moment Eli walked in, noticed the way he didn't flinch but didn't fight. She'd heard the jokes, the muttered slurs, the casual comments disguised as just banter. But this was something else. She felt the weight in her gut, the kind of wrong that sits under your ribs and won't leave. Ava slipped into the hallway, phone trembling slightly in her hand. She typed a name she hadn't spoken in weeks, Lieutenant Brandon Creed, a supervisor in the regional command, someone she trusted not because of his badge, but because he once stood up for her in a moment that could have ended her career. She attached a photo, a still from Eli's intake. The look in his eyes, not angry, not fearful, but exhausted. And she wrote one sentence, "Something's not right. Please check." Back in the main room, Eli was seated again in front of Wilmer, who pushed a clipboard toward him. "Sign. Statement of arrest." Eli picked it up. His eyes scanned the top line. "Suspect was detained for suspicious presentation inconsistent with professional licensing." He looked up slowly. "This isn't what happened." Wilmer didn't blink. "We'll let the system figure that out." Eli placed the clipboard down. "I passed the CDL exam. My name's on the load. I've driven this route for years. The only fraud here is the way you look at me." Silence followed. For a moment, even the buzzing lights seemed to hush. Ava stepped back into the room. Her voice didn't waver. "Sergeant, permission to review camera footage from the cruiser." Wilmer waved a hand. "Do what you want. It's not going to change who this person is." Ava didn't respond. She walked toward the desk, eyes flicking once toward Eli, then down to his bracelet, still lying quietly on the metal table. Outside, the sun hadn't yet risen, but a call had already been received. Brandon Creed was reading the message, and for the first time in years, his hands shook. Because the face in that image was one he'd never forgotten, and the silence he chose back then might now be the only thing standing between justice and destruction. The alert chimed on Brandon Creed's phone at 4:26 a.m. He was seated alone in a quiet operations office miles away, finishing an overnight rotation reviewing logistics for the regional response unit, half asleep and nursing lukewarm coffee. He might have ignored it if not for the name attached to the message, Ava Donnelly. He opened the image. The moment Brandon saw Eli's face, the breath caught in his chest. His hand gripped the edge of the desk, and his heartbeat, so steady in the face of chaos for years, missed a beat. Even through a grainy intake photo, Eli's expression pierced something buried deep inside him. The cheekbones were sharper, the jawline more defined, but the eyes hadn't changed. Memory hit like a blow. Years ago, they had stood side by side in formation. Two cadets at a military academy where discipline reigned and secrets lived in silence. Long nights studying tactics had blurred into longer nights, whispering in darkness, finding fragments of themselves in stolen seconds. But when it became too real, too risky, Brandon had chosen the path of caution over courage. He left. No goodbye, no warning, just vanished. And now, Eli's name was attached to an accusation that made no sense. Brandon didn't hesitate. He called Ava immediately. Her voice was low, controlled, but he could hear the weight behind it. "He was pulled over in Grayswood," she said. "They said he looked too polished. They booked him under false suspicion. Wilmer's running it. I couldn't stop it alone." Brandon's voice tightened. "Send me the full dash cam and body cam timestamps. Do not let them process him further. I'm on my way." He ended the call and stood, uniform on, belt clipped, boots laced. In less than 5 minutes, he was behind the wheel of his SUV, siren disabled but urgency in every mile he passed. Meanwhile, inside the station, Eli sat alone in the intake room. The clock ticked slowly. A dull ache settled behind his eyes. The fluorescent light above flickered in a steady rhythm, like a countdown. The cell door opened, and Ava stepped in. She didn't speak immediately. She simply handed him a bottle of water. Eli looked at her, unreadable. "I don't need pity." Ava didn't flinch. "This isn't pity. It's pause, and a little hope." He took the bottle but didn't drink. "I'm used to people letting things slide, telling themselves they're not the problem." Ava nodded slowly. "I've seen it. I've felt it, too." That surprised him. "I know what it means to hide parts of yourself to keep a uniform," she said. "But this isn't about surviving anymore. This is about stopping it before it burns someone down." Outside, Brandon was nearing the county line. He tapped into dispatch, requested body cam access, and remotely triggered a download command under his jurisdiction. When the files came through, he watched them in the vehicle silently, one after the other. The stop, the flashlight to Eli's chest, the smirking tone, the sentence that would echo louder than any siren, "You're too gay to drive a truck." He didn't fast forward. He didn't look away. By the time he arrived at the station, the sun was brushing the edges of the hills. The light was softened, golden, almost peaceful, yet nothing about the moment was quiet inside him. Back in the holding area, Eli leaned his head against the wall. He hadn't slept. His voice was low when he asked, "How long do they get to pretend they're protecting something?" Ava stood near the door. "Long enough for someone to let them." He turned his head toward her. "Then don't be someone." And she didn't look away. Down the hall, Wilmer was still seated in his office, a steaming mug beside him, typing up a preliminary report filled with omissions. He didn't notice the black SUV pull in. He didn't see the man in uniform step out. He didn't hear the door open until it was too late. Brandon Creed had arrived, and the past he left behind was now standing just a room away, ready to speak. The main doors of the station opened with a quiet thud, but to those inside, it might as well have been thunder. Brandon Creed stepped in without a word, his presence filling the room before his voice ever did. His uniform was immaculate, his posture sharp, but it wasn't the badges or the rank that turned heads. It was the authority that came from someone who had nothing left to fear. The air shifted, conversations fell silent. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. Ava was the first to greet him. Her expression held both relief and apprehension. "He's in the holding room," she said softly. "They're trying to push a formal charge through. Wilmer's leading it." Brandon nodded once. He didn't ask for files. He didn't sit down. He walked directly toward the back hall, toward the room where Eli had been kept since before dawn. As he approached, Wilmer stepped into view. The sergeant's eyes narrowed, and a familiar defensiveness curled at the edges of his words. "Lieutenant, I didn't expect you here this early." Brandon didn't slow. "You will explain why a fully licensed commercial driver is sitting in a holding cell without a clear charge." Wilmer crossed his arms. "He's under suspicion of identity fraud. No one that polished is hauling freight. He was playing a role." Brandon stopped, squarely, slowly. "I've reviewed the footage. The stop was unlawful. The language used was discriminatory. Your tone, your assumptions, your handling everything violated basic protocol." Wilmer sneered at him. "They didn't. So what now? You going to defend some drag queen with a fake license because he fluttered his lashes at the wrong trooper?" The sentence hung in the air like acid. Brandon's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "You will release him now, and you will prepare to surrender your badge for investigation." Wilmer's face flushed. "You really want to stake your career on that? You don't even know who he is." For the first time, Brandon stepped forward, not as an officer, but as a man with something to reclaim. "I know exactly who he is. He's the only man I regret walking away from." A gasp came from somewhere behind the glass. Ava stood in the hallway, her hand pressed to her chest, motionless. Wilmer took half a step back. The old confidence that powered so many whispered judgments began to crack. Is that what this is about, some queer reunion on taxpayer time? Brandon's reply was clear, final. This is about justice, about a man who did nothing wrong being humiliated, detained, and stripped of his dignity because you couldn't stomach his existence. He turned toward Ava. I want all body cam footage secured and backed up. I want a full report on the chain of custody, and I want it now. Wilmer tried once more. You're overstepping. This isn't your station. Brandon turned back. No, but I outrank you. And more importantly, I remember what integrity looks like. You lost that somewhere between your prejudice and your pen. With that, he pushed open the door to the holding room. Inside, Eli sat on the bench, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, but still clear, still unbroken. He looked up slowly, and when he saw who walked in, he froze. The uniform, the jawline, the man who had once vanished without a word. They didn't speak. Not yet. Brandon set down his clipboard, opened the restraints quietly, and whispered only one thing as the metal clicked, loose. You're free. But freedom meant more than leaving a room. It meant confronting everything that had once pushed them apart. And the reckoning had just begun. The clip began with a dashcam timestamp and the stillness of a rural road. A man's voice echoed from the recording, "You're too gay to drive a truck." No edits, no filters, just the raw footage of a stop that should have never happened. Ava uploaded the files through official complaint channels, following every procedure to the letter. What she didn't expect was how fast it would spread. By noon, the video had already reached major transportation forums. By sundown, it was front-page news. Some called it overblown, some called it overdue, but no one could call it fake. The truth was there in Eli's eyes as he stood beside his rig under flashing lights, in the voice of a man emboldened by hate, and in the silence of the officers who let it happen. Eli didn't speak at first, not to reporters, not to activists who wanted to turn him into a symbol. He'd spent years just trying to exist. That was already enough work. But then Brandon came to see him, not in uniform, not with apologies, just as himself. He didn't offer excuses for the past. He said only, "If you speak now, it won't just be for yourself." Eli thought about it for days. And then he walked onto a small stage at a regional logistics summit, wearing the same bracelet Wilmer had mocked. The crowd fell silent. He told them about the years of checking mirrors, not just for traffic, but for judgment, about pretending to fit an image to keep a gym, about what it meant to be professional when others decided what professional looked like. He ended simply, "I didn't survive this to stay quiet." The Department of Transportation took notice. By the end of the month, Eli had been invited to serve as a training advisor on inclusive conduct within the trucking industry. Not a token, a leader. Drivers across the country, gay, trans, women, immigrants sent messages. Many had stories they'd never dared to share, and one by one, silence began to break. Brandon remained behind the scenes. He knew some doors couldn't be reopened. But one morning, Eli found a letter slipped into his mailbox. It had no return address, just a line written in familiar script. "I left out of fear, but I stood up this time because of you." It didn't fix the past, but it lit something new in its place. And Ava quiet. Fierce Ava stood behind the podium weeks later and told her own truth. Her voice was steady. "I'm bisexual, and I was afraid of what that meant in this uniform. But watching Eli refuse to disappear gave me the strength to exist fully." The audience didn't clap immediately. They stood, because bravery is not always loud. Sometimes it's the choice to exist in full color in a world that tries to paint you gray. And Eli, he kept driving, through towns that once laughed, through highways that now held stories of change. He didn't need to be anyone else. He just needed to be seen. Have you ever been told you didn't look the part? What did you do if this story moved you? Don't forget to like, comment, and follow Heart Story, where every voice, every truth, and every journey matters.